My name is Hannah, and I'm a 21-year-old English literature major at one of the top universities in America. I've got long, flowing blonde hair that I often tie up in a high ponytail when I'm running to class or hitting the gym. I pride myself on staying fit. I'm about 5 feet 7 inches with a lean, toned physique. My workouts pay off, giving me a silhouette that turns heads. I have perky B-cup breasts, and I like to wear lacy, pastel-coloured bras to match my mood. Today, I'm wearing a soft pink one under my tight white tee. My feet are a size 7, and I've painted my toenails a vibrant coral to match the summer vibe. Life took a sharp turn when Mom remarried. My stepfather, Daniel, is quite the charmer, with his salt and pepper hair and that reassuring smile. He moved into our lives and into our home, seamlessly. I remember the day they got married. I wore a light blue sundress, and my coral-painted toes peeked through my sandals. Daniel has always been supportive, helping me with my studies, encouraging my fitness journey. He's often at my games, cheering the loudest when I score in soccer. But lately, things have felt different, more intimate. It was a typical Saturday afternoon, the sun casting lazy rays through the windows. I was in the kitchen, the scent of fresh coffee mingling with the morning air, when Daniel walked in. He was in his usual weekend attire, a simple t-shirt that hugged his form just right. "Hannah, do you have a minute?" he asked, his voice always so calm and collected. "Sure," I replied, setting down my mug, curious. We sat at the kitchen table and he started talking about my future, my dreams, but then the conversation took an unexpected turn. "You're becoming quite the young woman, Hannah. You know, you remind me a lot of how your mother was at your age, all that ambition wrapped in such a beautiful package." His eyes lingered a moment too long, and I felt a flush creep up my neck. I laughed awkwardly. "Thanks, Daniel, but I think I've got my own flair." The next few weeks were filled with little moments, a touch that lingered, a look that held more than it should. I found myself dressing up a bit more, choosing my outfits with a new kind of awareness. Today, I put on my favourite black lace thong, invisible under my jeans, but it made me feel bold, seen. We were having dinner, just the two of us. Mom was out of town. The conversation started innocently enough about my latest literature project on Shakespeare. But then he asked, "Do you feel beautiful, Hannah?" I looked at him, surprised at the directness. "I guess. I try to take care of myself." "You should." He leaned in slightly. "Because you are. It's important to feel that, to embrace it." The air felt thick with unspoken words. I excused myself, heart racing, not sure if I was flattered or just uncomfortable. I've been thinking a lot about these interactions. They're confusing, stirring feelings I'm not sure how to handle. I talked to my best friend Mia about it. She's always been the voice of reason. "Mia, do you think it's weird that Daniel seems so interested in me?" She pondered for a moment. "It's a thin line, Hannah, but remember, you set the boundaries. If you feel it's too much, you need to talk about it." That night, I lay in bed, my thoughts swirling like the pages of my literature books, complex and layered. I'm Hannah, the blonde, fit and ambitious student, but now I feel like I'm in a narrative I didn't choose, one where every interaction with Daniel seems to need a careful reading. The next morning, I woke up with the sun streaming through my window, casting a warm glow over my room. I chose a light, flowing dress for the day, something that felt both comfortable and chic. Underneath, I wore a delicate white lace bra and matching panties, almost as if I was dressing for an unseen audience. I was in the living room flipping through my literature notes when Daniel walked in. His presence always seemed to change the atmosphere. He had that easy, confident stride. "Morning, Hannah. You look radiant today," he said with a smile that seemed to carry more weight than usual. "Thanks," I replied, feeling my cheeks warm up. "Just getting some studying done." He sat down beside me, closer than usual. His cologne was subtle but noticeable, and I found myself slightly leaning in to catch the scent. "You know," he began, his voice low and intimate. I was thinking about what we talked about yesterday, about feeling beautiful. I looked up from my notes, meeting his gaze. Yeah.
You should always feel that way, he said, his hand brushing against mine as he reached for a book on the table. The touch was fleeting, but it sent a shiver through me. You're not just beautiful, you're captivating, Hannah. I didn't know how to respond, so I just nodded, my heart beating a little faster. He continued, I see how hard you work, how you strive to be more than what people expect. It's inspiring. Thanks, Daniel, I managed, my voice barely above a whisper. There was an intensity in his eyes that made me feel both seen and exposed. Would you like to go for a walk later? Get some fresh air? Maybe talk about your Shakespeare project? I'd love to hear more about it, he suggested, his tone inviting. That sounds nice, I agreed, realizing that part of me wanted to explore this new dynamic, to understand where these conversations could lead. Later that afternoon, we walked through the park near our house. The autumn leaves crunched under our feet, and the air was crisp. Daniel was talking about the nuances of Romeo and Juliet, drawing parallels between the story and our own lives. His words felt like they were layered with meaning. You're like Juliet in a way, he said, stopping under a tree, the leaves casting shadows over us. Full of passion, beauty, and potential. But you need to be careful where you place your heart. His hand found mine again. This time, it lingered, his thumb gently stroking my skin. My breath hitched, the world seemed to narrow to just us. Daniel, I began, unsure of what I was about to say. He leaned closer, his voice dropping to a whisper. You don't need to say anything, Hannah. Just know that I'm here. I see you, all of you. We stood there, the moment stretching, filled with an unspoken tension. I knew I should pull away, maintain the boundaries, but part of me was curious. Part of me wanted to see how far this would go. As we walked back home, I felt the weight of his words, the touch of his hand, the look in his eyes. I was at the beginning of a story where I wasn't sure what role I wanted to play, but I knew one thing for sure. Daniel was no longer just my stepfather. He was an enigma, a challenge to my understanding of relationships, and I was both scared and intrigued by what lay ahead. As we returned home, the air inside was thick with the remnants of our conversation. I excused myself to change into something more comfortable, slipping into a pair of shorts and a loose tank top, my mind still reeling from the walk. Daniel was in the kitchen when I came back down, preparing dinner. He looked up, his eyes scanning me from head to toe in a way that made me feel both admired and scrutinized. Nice outfit, he commented, his voice carrying a hint of something more than just casual observation. It suits you well. Thanks, I said, feeling the need to keep some distance, yet I found myself leaning against the counter near him, watching as he chopped vegetables with a precision that seemed almost suggestive. You know, Hannah, he began, setting the knife down and turning to face me fully. I've been thinking about you a lot lately, more than I probably should. I felt my pulse quicken, the air between us charged. Daniel, what do you mean? He stepped closer, his presence overwhelming. I mean, you're growing into such a stunning woman. It's hard not to notice everything about you. I swallowed, the boundary I had set in my mind blurring. I don't know what to say. You don't need to say anything, he whispered, his hand reaching out to touch a lock of my hair, letting it fall through his fingers. But I want you to know that I think about you. A lot. His words hung in the air, and I felt a mix of shock, thrill, and confusion. I should have stepped back, but I didn't. Instead, I stood there watching his eyes, which seemed to undress me with every glance. "Daniel, this isn't right," I muttered, though my voice lacked conviction. "Isn't it?" he countered, his voice low and persuasive. "We're both adults here, Hannah, and sometimes what feels right isn't always what society deems acceptable." His hand moved from my hair to my shoulder, his touch lingering, sending an electric current through me. I was aware of how thin my tank top was, how it did little to hide the contours of my body. "You're shaking," he noted, his voice almost a purr. "Is it because of me?" I nodded, unsure if it was fear, excitement, or a dangerous mix of both. "I think we should talk about something else," I managed to say, trying to steer the conversation away from this perilous path. He chuckled, a sound that was both comforting and unsettling. "All right, we'll talk about anything you want. But remember, Hannah, the way you make me feel isn't something I can just ignore." Dinner was a blur.
His words, his looks, they all seemed to hint at a side of him I hadn't seen or acknowledged before. As we ate, he kept the conversation light, but every now and then, his foot would brush against mine under the table, or his hand would reach out to adjust something near me, always with that lingering touch. After dinner, I retreated to my room, my mind a whirlwind of thoughts. Daniel's behaviour was inappropriate, yet there was a part of me, a small, curious, and perhaps reckless part, that was drawn to the forbidden nature of it all. Lying in bed that night, I knew I had to confront this situation, set clear boundaries, or risk losing myself in a narrative that could only end in disaster. But as I drifted to sleep, the image of Daniel's intense gaze was the last thing on my mind, leaving me to wonder where this would lead us next. The next morning, the house was quiet, a stark contrast to the storm of emotions brewing inside me. I decided to go for a run, hoping the physical exertion would clear my head. I threw on my tight running shorts and a sports bra under a thin, breathable top, my blonde hair tied back in a no-nonsense ponytail. As I was lacing up my sneakers, Daniel appeared at the doorway of my room, his eyes taking in my outfit with an appreciative glance that made me feel exposed. "Going for a run?" he asked, his voice smooth, almost too casual. "Yeah, need to clear my mind," I replied, standing up to stretch, which only seemed to draw his attention more. "Mind if I join you?" he proposed, his tone suggesting he knew the answer he wanted. I hesitated. The idea of being alone with him, even in a public space like the park, felt like walking into quicksand. "Sure, if you can keep up," I said, trying to sound light-hearted, though my heart was racing with apprehension. We started off at a brisk pace, the morning air cool against my skin. Daniel kept pace beside me, occasionally offering remarks about the scenery or asking about my studies, but there was an undercurrent to his conversation, a flirtatious edge that hadn't been there before. "You look good when you run," he said, his breath steady despite the pace. "You're all focus, all energy." I glanced at him, trying to read his intentions. "Thanks," I managed, my voice tight. We ran in silence for a bit. The only sounds were our footsteps and the occasional bird call. Then, as we slowed near a more secluded part of the park, he reached out, catching my arm gently to slow me down. "Hannah, wait," he said, his voice low and urgent. He was close, too close, his breath mingling with mine. "What is it, Daniel?" I asked, my tone a mix of caution and curiosity. "I can't stop thinking about last night," he confessed, his hand still on my arm, his thumb stroking my skin. "About you." I felt the heat rise in my cheeks, my heart pounding not just from the run. "Daniel, this isn't right. You're married to my mum," I reminded him, though my words felt weak against the intensity of his gaze. "I know, but sometimes feelings don't follow the rules," he said, stepping even closer. His proximity was overwhelming, his body language speaking volumes of his intentions.
I stepped back, needing space to breathe, to think. We need to set some boundaries here, Daniel. This can't continue. He nodded, but there was a look in his eyes, a hunger that suggested he wasn't ready to give up. I'll respect your boundaries, Hannah, but know that my feelings for you aren't just going to disappear. We walked back to the house in a tense silence, the air between us thick with unspoken words and desires. When we got home, I went straight to my room, needing the solitude to process everything. But as I stood under the shower, washing away the sweat, I couldn't shake the feeling of his touch on my arm, the weight of his gaze, or the complexity of the emotions he stirred within me. I knew I had to talk to someone, to seek advice, but as I lay on my bed, all I could think about was the dangerous allure of Daniel's attention and how it might change everything.